On a quiet Sunday morning, no one could have imagined the horrifying events that would soon unfold. A mother, once filled with love for her daughter, would take a path no one expected. By the end of the day, that same daughter would lie dead, her life cut short by the hands of the one person meant to protect her. Adia, a mother who had always been close to her daughter Chica, discovered something that shattered her world and affair. But this wasn't just any affair. Chica was involved with a younger man, and when Adia uncovered the truth, her anger and hurt pushed her to a deadly decision. In a moment of rage, the bond between mother and daughter was broken forever. What caused Ada to snap? How could a relationship that once seemed so strong end in such a tragic way? And what role did the young lover, Emeka, play in this heartbreaking story? As we dive into the details of this shocking crime, we'll uncover how a simple discovery turned into a deadly confrontation. Officer Ikenna, a seasoned detective, arrives at the scene to piece together the events leading to the murder. Was it a crime of passion or something deeper? Join us as we unravel the chilling events of that day, leading up to the heartbreaking conclusion that left one family shattered forever. Ada had always been a dedicated mother. Her life revolved around her daughter, Chica, who was the light of her world. After her husband's passing, Ada devoted herself entirely to raising Chica, determined to give her the best life she could. Their bond was strong, built on years of love, care, and understanding. As Chica grew older, their relationship remained close though. Like any mother and daughter, they had their disagreements. However, nothing prepared Adia for what she was about to uncover. Chica, at 26, was a beautiful young woman with a promising future. She had a good job, a wide circle of friends, and a charming personality. People were drawn to her, and it was no surprise that she had admirers. But there was one person in particular who had caught Chica's eye, a younger man named Emeka, who was just 24 years old. They had been seeing each other in secret, knowing that Adia would disapprove of their relationship. Emeka was different from the men Chica had dated before. He was confident, outgoing, and younger, which made their relationship exciting but risky. Chica enjoyed the thrill of being with him, but she kept their romance hidden from her mother. She knew Ada wouldn't approve, especially because Emeka was younger and, in Ada's eyes, not mature enough for a serious relationship. This secrecy created a divide between mother and daughter, though Chica didn't realize how far it would push them apart. One fateful day, everything changed. Ada had been cleaning Chica's room when she came across something she wasn't supposed to find: a message on Chica's phone that revealed the truth about her relationship with Emeka. Shocked and hurt, Ada couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her daughter had been hiding this from her for months. The betrayal she felt was overwhelming. To Ada, this wasn't just about Chica keeping a relationship secret, it was about trust, respect, and the values she had tried so hard to instill in her daughter. Ada confronted Chica later that evening. The discussion quickly turned into an argument. Ada's anger boiled over as she questioned her daughter's judgment, accusing her of dishonoring their family. Chica, feeling attacked, defended her relationship with Emeka, explaining that she was in love and that her mother didn't understand, but Ada couldn't accept it. To her, this relationship was wrong on many levels, and she believed Emeka was taking advantage of her daughter's youth and naivety. The argument became heated, with both women saying things they would later regret. Ada felt as though she was losing control over the one person she loved the most. Chica, on the other hand, felt suffocated by her mother's strict expectations and judgment. The tension between them grew with each passing minute, and eventually Chica stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. For the next few days, Ada couldn't get the argument out of her mind. She became obsessed with the idea that Emeka was ruining her daughter's life. Every time Chica left the house, Ada worried that she was going to meet him. The trust that had once existed between them was now shattered, and Ada's anger grew stronger with each passing day. As for Chica, she was torn between her love for Emeka and her loyalty to her mother. She knew how much Ada disapproved of their relationship, but she couldn't bring herself to end things with Emeka. Their connection was too strong, and she didn't want to give up on him. But the pressure from her mother was starting to wear on her, and she felt like she was being forced to choose between the two most important people in her life. Meanwhile, Ada couldn't let go of her belief that Emeka was a bad influence on her daughter. She started to dig deeper into his background, asking around and gathering information. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that Emeka wasn't who he appeared to be. She was determined to protect her daughter, no matter the cost. Then, one evening, Ada made a decision that would change everything. She called Chica to sit down and talk. Ada hoped to convince her daughter once and for all to end the relationship with Emeka, but things didn't go as planned. Chika, exhausted by the constant fighting, stood her ground. She refused to break up with Emeka, insisting that she loved him and that her mother was being unreasonable. This refusal pushed Ada over the edge. In a moment of rage, years of frustration and disappointment came crashing down. What happened next would forever haunt Ada's life. The story of that night is still hard to piece together. Emotions were high and things escalated quickly. But one thing was certain: Chika never left the house alive. In the heat of the moment, Ada's anger turned deadly, and her daughter's life was tragically cut short. By the time the authorities were called, it was too late. Chika's lifeless body lay on the floor, and Ada stood in shock, unable to comprehend what she had just done. The once loving relationship between mother and daughter had ended in the most horrifying way possible. As the investigation began, Officer Akena arrived on the scene to sort through the details of what had happened. It was a crime that shocked everyone, a mother taking the life of her own daughter. But what had driven Ada to commit such a terrible act? And what role had Emeka played in the tragedy? The answers to these questions would soon begin to unfold as the full story of that night came to light. The night everything changed for Ada and Chika was meant to be just another evening at home. Tension had been building for weeks after Ada discovered her daughter's secret relationship with Emeka. That night, Ada was alone in the living room, her thoughts consumed by worry and frustration. She had been thinking non-stop about the argument she had with Chika days earlier. Nothing had been resolved, and Ada's anger had only grown stronger. Chika came home late that evening, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break. She had been with Emeka again, and her mother knew it. Ada was waiting for her, her heart pounding as she prepared for another confrontation. When Chika entered the house, Ada immediately demanded to know where she had been. Chika, tired of the constant fights, refused to answer, brushing off her mother's questions. In the silence that followed, the weight of their broken relationship hung heavy in the air. Ada had spent years raising Chika on her own, sacrificing so much, and now she felt betrayed by her own daughter. In her mind, Chika was choosing Emeka over the family, and Ada couldn't stand it any longer. She believed she had lost control of her daughter and that Emeka had taken over her life. The situation felt like it was slipping through her fingers, and Ada's frustration turned to rage. The argument started again, only this time it was more intense than before. Ada shouted, accusing Chika of dishonoring their family. Chika defended herself, insisting that she had the right to make her own choices. But to Ada, this was about more than a relationship. It was about losing her daughter to someone she didn't trust. The shouting escalated as neither side was willing to back down. Ada's anger reached a breaking point. In a moment of uncontrollable fury, Ada grabbed a heavy object from the table nearby. Chika barely had time to react before Ada struck her. The impact was hard, and Chika fell to the floor. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. Ada stood frozen, staring at her daughter's motionless body on the ground. Panic and disbelief washed over her as she realized what she had done. The weight of the situation hit Ada all at once. She rushed to Chika's side, shaking her, hoping for any sign of life. But Chika didn't move. Ada's hands trembled as she looked at the blood spreading on the floor. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. It hadn't been her intention to kill her daughter. She had only wanted to stop the argument, but now it was too late. Desperation took hold of Ada. She tried to call for help, her hands shaking as she dialed the emergency number. When the operator answered, Ada could barely speak. The reality of what she had done made it hard for her to breathe. She whispered the details of the situation, her voice cracking under the weight of her guilt. She stayed on the phone until the sound of sirens filled the air, getting louder as they approached the house. When the police arrived, they found Ada sitting on the floor next to Chika's body, still in shock. Officer Akena was the first to enter the house. He had seen many crime scenes in his career, but something about this one felt different. It wasn't just another case of violence, it was a family tragedy. He could see the devastation in Ada's eyes as she sat there, unable to move. Akena and his team quickly secured the scene, separating Ada from her daughter's body. As they began their investigation, they took note of the chaos inside the house. There were clear signs of a struggle, and Chika's injuries told the story of what had happened. Akena knew that this case would be difficult not just because of the crime itself, but because of the emotional toll it had taken on those involved. Ada was taken into custody that night, too stunned to resist. She had lost everything in a matter of moments, and the reality of it all was just beginning to sink in. As she sat in the back of the police car, she stared blankly out the window, her mind replaying the events of the evening over and over again. Meanwhile, Officer Akena began piecing together the details of the case. He interviewed neighbors who had heard the argument and seen the aftermath. They spoke of the tension between Ada and Chika, saying that they had been arguing for weeks. Some of them had even witnessed previous confrontations between the two, but none of them had expected it to end like this. As the investigation moved forward, the police learned more about the relationship between Chika and Emeka. They discovered the secret that had caused so much tension between mother and daughter, and it became clear that this was no ordinary crime. It was a tragedy born from anger, betrayal, and a love that had turned deadly. As Officer Akena began his investigation into Chika's death, the details of the tragic night started to come together. Ada's confession was the first step in understanding what had taken place. She admitted to the argument that led to the deadly confrontation, but there were still many questions about what had truly caused her to snap. The relationship between Chika and Emeka played a significant role, but the deeper layers of this crime were yet to be revealed. Ada, still in shock from the events of that night, sat in the interrogation room at the police station. She struggled to explain what had driven her to such violence. Her mind was clouded with guilt and grief. She told the police that she had only meant to stop the argument, not to kill her daughter. But the evidence was clear. Chika had died from a severe blow, and Ada was responsible. Meanwhile, Officer Akena and his team began gathering statements from neighbors and friends who knew the family. The people closest to Ada and Chika described a relationship that had grown increasingly strained in the months leading up to the tragedy. Neighbors had heard loud arguments coming from the house on more than one occasion, and some of Chika's friends mentioned that she had confided in them about the growing tension with her mother. However, no one could have predicted that the situation would end in such a terrible way. Emeka, the young man at the center of the conflict, was also brought in for questioning. His involvement in the case was crucial to understanding what had led to Chika's death. Emeka described his relationship with Chika as loving but secretive. He knew that Ada disapproved of their relationship and that this had caused a rift between Chika and her mother. Emeka was heartbroken by Chika's death, but he also felt a deep sense of guilt, believing that their relationship had been the trigger for the fatal argument. As the investigation continued, the police pieced together the timeline of events. Chika had returned home that night after spending time with Emeka, unaware that her mother was waiting to confront her. The argument had started almost immediately, and things escalated quickly. Ada's anger had boiled over, and in a moment of blind rage, she struck her daughter, leading to the tragic outcome. The evidence lined up with Ada's confession, but there was still more to uncover. Officer Akena focused on understanding Ada's state of mind at the time of the crime. He spoke with friends and family members who described Ada as a loving but strict mother. She had always been protective of Chika, especially after her husband's death years earlier. Ada had dedicated her life to raising her daughter, and many people saw her as a strong, caring woman. But over time, the relationship between mother and daughter had become strained, especially as Chika grew older and began making decisions that Ada didn't agree with. The investigation revealed that Ada's disapproval of Emeka wasn't just about the age difference. Ada had deeper concerns about the future she had envisioned for Chika. She had wanted her daughter to follow a certain path, one that she believed was best for her. When Chika started seeing Emeka, Ada saw this as a threat to everything she had worked so hard to protect. The fear of losing her daughter to someone she didn't trust fueled Ada's anger and resentment, ultimately leading to the deadly confrontation. While the police worked on building their case, the media began to pick up on the story. The headlines focused on the tragic nature of the crime, a mother killing her own daughter. The public was shocked by the details of the case, and the question on everyone's mind was how something like this could happen. As more details emerged, the narrative became one of family conflict, betrayal, and a love that had turned into something deadly. Officer Akena and his team worked tirelessly to ensure that every detail was accounted for. They collected forensic evidence from the scene, confirming that Chika had died from a single blow. The weapon, a heavy object from the living room, was taken into evidence, and Ada's fingerprints were all over it. There was no doubt that she had been the one to deliver the fatal blow. The question that remained was whether this was a crime of passion or something more calculated. As the investigation drew closer to completion, the case against Ada became clearer. She had acted in a moment of rage, but there were layers of emotion and conflict that had built up over time. The pressure of raising Chika alone, the fear of losing control over her daughter's life, and the frustration of watching her make choices that Ada couldn't accept. All of these factors had led to the breaking point. Ada had lost herself in that moment, and the consequences were irreversible. With the evidence in place, Officer Ikena prepared to hand the case over to the prosecution. Ada would face charges for her daughter's death, and the trial would soon begin. The investigation had uncovered the truth behind what happened that night, but the emotional toll it had taken on everyone involved was far from over. Emeka, still grappling with his own grief and guilt, would have to testify in court, along with the friends and neighbors who had witnessed the unraveling of this family tragedy. The story of Ada and Chika was a reminder of how quickly a life can be taken and how deep family conflicts can run. As the case moved toward trial, the full impact of that fateful night was only beginning to be felt. As the trial of Ada began, emotions ran high both inside and outside the courtroom. The story of a mother accused of killing her own daughter had caught the attention of the public, and everyone seemed to have an opinion on what had happened that fateful night. Some saw Ada as a grieving mother who had acted out of desperation, while others viewed her as a cold-blooded killer who had let her anger drive her to commit an unthinkable crime. The prosecution laid out their case clearly, painting a picture of a woman who had grown increasingly frustrated with her daughter's choices, particularly her relationship with Emeka. According to the prosecution, this frustration had built up over time, leading Ada to commit murder in a fit of rage. They argued that the evidence was clear Chika had been struck with a heavy object during a heated argument, and the force of the blow had been enough to end her life. There was no denying that Ada had been the one to deliver the fatal strike, and the prosecution aimed to prove that this was not an accident, but an intentional act fueled by anger and resentment. The defense, however, offered a different narrative. They portrayed Ada as a devoted mother who had spent years caring for her daughter, only to find herself caught in a moment of overwhelming emotion. The defense team argued that Ada had not intended to kill Chika, but had simply lost control during the argument. They emphasized that Ada's actions were not premeditated, and that the tragic outcome was the result of a deeply strained relationship and a momentary lapse in judgment. As the trial progressed, the courtroom heard testimony from various witnesses, including friends and neighbors who had been aware of the tensions between Ada and Chika. Some spoke of the arguments they had overheard, describing the shouting and the tension that seemed to have become a regular part of their household. Others testified about Ada's character, painting a picture of a mother who had always been loving and protective, but who had grown increasingly concerned about her daughter's relationship with Emeka. Emeka himself took the stand, visibly shaken as he recounted the events leading up to Chika's death. He spoke of their secret relationship, explaining how Chika had hidden their love from her mother, knowing that Ada would not approve. Emeka described how Chika had often felt torn between her love for him and her loyalty to her mother. He also expressed his own guilt, acknowledging that their relationship had caused a deep rift between Chika and Ada, but insisting that he never imagined it would lead to such a tragic end. The prosecution seized on Emeka's testimony, using it to support their argument that Ada's anger toward her daughter's relationship with him had been the driving force behind the murder. They pointed out that Ada had long disapproved of Emeka, and that her frustration with her daughter's choices had finally boiled over into violence. The prosecution argued that Ada had been determined to put an end to the relationship, and in her anger she had taken Chika's life. The defense, however, countered by emphasizing the emotional toll that the strained relationship had taken on Ada. They argued that she had not been in control of her emotions that night, and that the incident was a tragic accident, not an intentional murder. They pointed to Ada's history of being a caring and loving mother, suggesting that she had acted out of fear and desperation, not out of malice or hatred. Throughout the trial, the jury listened carefully to both sides, trying to make sense of the conflicting narratives. The evidence was clear Ada had struck the blow that ended her daughter's life. But the question remained, had she done so with the intent to kill, or had it been a momentary lapse in judgment, a tragic mistake brought on by the overwhelming emotion of the situation? As the days went on, the courtroom became a battleground for the two opposing sides. The prosecution pushed for a conviction of murder, arguing that Ada had taken her daughter's life out of frustration and anger. The defense, on the other hand, pleaded for leniency, insisting that Ada had not intended for things to end this way, and that she was as much a victim of the tragic circumstances as anyone else. Meanwhile, Ada sat quietly throughout the trial, her face pale and her eyes filled with regret. She had lost everything: her daughter, her freedom, and her reputation. No matter what the outcome of the trial, she knew that her life would never be the same. The weight of her actions pressed down on her every day, and the grief of losing Chica was a constant reminder of the terrible consequences of that night. As the trial drew to a close, both the prosecution and defense made their final arguments. The prosecution asked the jury to consider the evidence, to recognize the anger that had driven Ada to kill her daughter, and to deliver a verdict of murder. The defense, on the other hand, urged the jury to see the humanity in Ada, to understand the emotional turmoil that had led to the tragedy, and to show mercy in their judgment. With the trial now in the hands of the jury, the future of Ada's life hung in the balance. The outcome of the case would determine not only her fate, but also how the world would remember the tragic story of a mother and daughter whose love had been shattered by a moment of violence. The jury would soon deliver its verdict, but for now the courtroom fell silent as everyone waited to see what the future would hold. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back in, their expressions unreadable. Ada sat at the defense table, her hands trembling slightly as she waited for the decision that would determine her future. The trial had been long and emotional, filled with painful memories and hard truths. Now, it was time for the jury to decide whether Ada would spend the rest of her life in prison, or if she would be granted some measure of mercy for the crime she had committed. The prosecution had presented a strong case, arguing that Ada had acted out of anger and frustration when she killed her daughter Chica. They had painted her as a woman who had let her resentment build over time, only to explode in a moment of rage. The defense, however, had portrayed Ada as a heartbroken mother who had simply lost control in the heat of the moment. They argued that Ada had not intended to kill Chica, but had acted impulsively, driven by fear and desperation. Both sides had presented compelling arguments, and now the fate of Ada's life lay in the hands of the jury. As the jury foreperson stood to deliver the verdict, the tension in the room was almost unbearable. Ada stared straight ahead, bracing herself for whatever was to come. The foreperson announced the decision not guilty of first-degree murder, but guilty of manslaughter. The room erupted in murmurs as the weight of the verdict sank in. For Ada, the verdict was both a relief and a heavy burden. She would not spend her life in prison, but she would still face significant time behind bars. The charge of manslaughter carried a sentence that could be anywhere from 10 to 20 years, depending on the judge's decision. Ada knew that while she had avoided the harshest punishment, she would still pay dearly for the crime she had committed. The weight of her actions would follow her for the rest of her life, regardless of how long she spent in prison. The judge called for silence in the courtroom as he prepared to deliver the sentence. He spoke of the tragedy of the case, the loss of a young life, and the heartbreak that had torn a family apart. The judge acknowledged that Ada's actions had been driven by emotion, but he also emphasized the seriousness of the crime. Taking a life, even in a moment of anger, could not be excused. After a pause, the judge sentenced Ada to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. As the sentence was read, Ada's face remained calm, though her eyes were filled with sorrow. She had expected this outcome, knowing that her actions had consequences that could not be undone. The sound of the gavel brought the trial to a close, and Ada was led away in handcuffs. She glanced back at the courtroom one last time, her heart heavy with regret. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered to cover the end of the trial. The case had attracted widespread attention, and the media had followed every twist and turn closely. Ada's story had captivated the public, not just because of the crime itself, but because of the complicated emotions involved. People debated whether Ada deserved the punishment she had received, with some feeling sympathy for the mother who had lost control, and others believing she had gotten off too lightly for taking her daughter's life. In the weeks that followed the trial, life began to move on for those involved in the case, though the scars remained. Emeka, still devastated by Chica's death, struggled to come to terms with the role he had played in the tragedy. He blamed himself for the tension between Chica and Ada, and he knew that their relationship had been the catalyst for the terrible events that unfolded. Though he had not been directly involved in the crime, the guilt weighed heavily on him, and he found it difficult to move forward. For Ada, life in prison was a stark reality. The walls of her cell were a constant reminder of the choices she had made and the life she had taken. She spent her days reflecting on the moments that led to the tragedy, replaying the argument over and over in her mind. No amount of time behind bars could bring Chica back, and Ada knew that she would have to live with the pain of that loss for the rest of her life. Chica's friends and family mourned her loss, struggling to make sense of the senseless crime that had taken her life. The bright, loving young woman they had known was gone, and her absence left a void that could never be filled. They remembered Chica for the joy she had brought to their lives, even as they struggled to understand how a family could be torn apart by such deep conflict. The story of Ada and Chica is a reminder of the devastating impact that family tensions can have when left unresolved. What began as a conflict over choices and relationships spiraled into a tragedy that no one could have predicted. Ada's actions on that fateful night shattered not only her own life but the lives of everyone around her. As the years pass, the memory of that night will continue to haunt those who were involved. For Ada, the regret and sorrow will never fade, even after she has served her time. She will always carry the burden of knowing that, in a moment of anger, she took the life of the one person she loved most in the world.